Good morning and welcome to today's webcast, looking ahead to employee benefit plans in 2024. Before we begin, I'm going to play a brief housekeeping video.
Welcome and thanks for joining. We're pleased to present our continuing professional education webcast series. Before we begin, please keep the following in mind. You can customize how you view our presentation and interact with the presenter. For better viewing, close all other applications and turn up your speaker volume. You can adjust window size and placement or enter full screen mode using the controls at the top right of the window or dragging the bottom right-hand corner to resize. At the bottom of your screen, you'll see a series of icons that relate to a different aspect of our session. You can download a PDF of today's slides from the Slide Deck and Handouts widget. You can ask questions by typing in the Q&A window and clicking Submit. We'll do our best to answer all questions or follow up via email. If you experience technical difficulty, refresh your browser by hitting the F5 key. Today's session offers 1 CPE credit. To receive credit, you must meet the National Association of State Boards of Accountancy requirements. You must attend at least 50 minutes of the session and respond to at least 75% of polling questions. To participate in the polls, please check the button next to your answer within the slide window and click Submit. We'll track your progress and alert you when you've earned CPE credit. You can then click the certificate icon in the CPE Progress widget and download your CPE certificate. Don't worry if you can't download your CPE certificate today. We'll email you a copy in 2 weeks. If attending this webcast in a group, you must complete our group CPE attendance sheet, available in our Slide Deck and Handouts widget to receive credit. Please have all group members sign it and send only 1 sheet per group. CPE credit can only be awarded to participants registered as themselves and isn't available for participants who view the on-demand version. This presentation is not legal, investment, or accounting advice. We encourage you to seek the counsel of a professional service provider to apply this content to your specific circumstances.
And with that, I will turn it over to Erin Goldfarb to get us started.
Great. Thanks, Emily. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our webinar, Looking Ahead to Employee Benefit Plans in 2024, presented by Moss Adams. I am Erin Goldfarb, and I'm an assurance partner here at the firm. I serve on the firm's Employee Benefit Plan Executive Committee, and I'm also a leader in our NorCal Employee Benefit Plan practice. I will be your moderator today, and joining me this morning are 2 very talented presenters. It's my pleasure to introduce Heidi Berenbrok. Heidi is a director at Moss Adams with extensive experience auditing employee benefit plans. She leads the Denver Employee Benefit Plan practice, and that includes training our audit teams and advising clients to ensure compliance with ERISA. Thanks so much for being here today, Heidi.
Thanks, Erin. I'm really excited about today.
Great. We're excited you're here too. And we also have Joy Timple. Joy is a senior manager at Moss Adams. Joy has over a decade working in the employee benefit plan practice and also leads the San Diego Employee Benefit Plan practice. She also serves with me on the firm's executive committee for employee benefit plans. Welcome, Joy. Happy to have you here.
It's great to be here as well, Erin.
Great. So we're going to have a polling question in just a moment. But before that, let's go over our learning objectives. Today, we're going to discuss lessons learned from 2022 plan audits. We're also going to explain the impact of the Secure Act 2.0 on your employee benefit plan sponsors and discuss the key recommendations to educating your workforce. And I also do want to remind our audience that we have a Q&A box in the platform. And so we will be taking questions and having some time for Q&A at the end. So if you have a question, please feel free to put it in the chat. All right, and with that, we have our first polling question. Which position best describes your role? So are you an employee benefit plan auditor? Do you work with external employee benefit plan auditors as part of your role? Do you provide services to companies with an employee benefit plan? Or if it's other, feel free to pop it in the chat. Let us know.
All right, we'll give everyone a few moments to respond, and to participate in our polls today, please click the button and hit submit. So just make sure you hit submit after you've made your selection. We'll give everyone a couple more seconds on this first poll.
Great. It's always wonderful to know who is in your audience today. We want to make sure the content is as tailored as possible to your needs.
All right, let's go ahead and see who we have on the line.
All right, so it looks like we have a little over half as other, and then it looks like the next greatest group is you work with external auditors as part of the role at your company. So wonderful. Well, welcome everyone. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Heidi Berenbrok.
Thanks, Erin. Wow, I'm a little interested in that other box and you know who we have here. Hopefully, people that have some interest in employee benefit plans. Maybe you're just trying to get your CPE in before the end of the year. I appreciate that too. All right. So what we're going to start off on is just talking about lessons learned during our 2022 plan year audits. And so what we're going to talk about first is just the kind of the foundation of your plan and some of the things that we see when we're conducting audits. So just starting with your plan document, the adoption agreement, you know, those are the legal documents that support your plan. And there's a few issues I'd like to hone in on that come up when we're doing plan audits and raise a few challenges, I think, for plan sponsors. So let's start with eligibility. So obviously, it's important to have a good understanding of when employees are able to enter the plan and the entry date that deferrals can begin. It might be immediate. It might be a waiting period. You might have like a 3-month wait or a 1-year wait before participants are able to enter. But what's important is ensuring you've established a process to monitor when employees become eligible and how they receive communication of that eligibility, as well as information on the enrollment process. I think one thing that I see a lot is that this is outsourced. You have a service provider that performs this function. And so sometimes companies will think, well, I've got this service provider. I don't have to really monitor this or handle this. And that's, I think, a key area where plan sponsors can focus in on is you still want to have some oversight over that process and just ensure that you're monitoring that eligibility and entry process. The next one I want to talk about, you know, we've listed several plan provisions here. I'm going to talk about 3 of them, is this employer contributions. And with regard to employer contributions, the issue that I usually see involves calculations that happen outside of your payroll system. So, you know, if you have a really easy match or a safe harbor match, oftentimes you're doing that within your payroll. The match gets calculated at the same time that the deferral is being calculated, and there's not a lot of external calculations. But if you're using an Excel spreadsheet to calculate your employer contributions, there are some opportunities for error to occur. And so just a best practice to have probably more than one set of eyes on that. This is something I recommend to my clients. Just having a person that's preparing that calculation, making sure somebody else is looking at it and validating those inputs, making sure the formulas are working, and that your employees are receiving the amounts that they're entitled to. You know, the other plan provision I see that we discuss a lot with our clients has to do with plan compensation and the definition of eligible compensation. So your plan document or your adoption agreement will outline what qualifies as eligible compensation. And it's really important that the person that's handling the day-to-day operations has a good understanding of what that definition is and ensures that the payroll system has been properly set up to calculate deferrals using that correct compensation number. You know, oftentimes there are elements of compensation that are excluded for purposes of calculating deferrals, and just identifying those and knowing what to exclude is important. I'm going to talk a little more about use of forfeitures on a later slide, so I'm going to skip over that. Okay, so plan oversight is an area that we end up talking about with our clients quite a bit. Plan sponsors really need to have a mechanism in place to ensure that there is some group of people overseeing the plan and the activities of the plan. So typically what we see is a plan administrative committee, and it's usually scaled to the size of the company. So if you have a smaller entity, this might be the CFO and the CEO handling this. If you have a larger company, then you might include people from various departments, the HR manager, someone from the payroll side, just various individuals that are going to be charged with this oversight function. I think what's key is that this group really needs to be meeting on a periodic basis to discuss the various things that could impact the plan. So considering the investments that are available in the plan and whether any changes are needed there. Maybe establishing or reviewing policies that are in place, modifying them as necessary. And I think the real key here is making sure that you're documenting that these meetings are occurring. Oftentimes we'll talk to a plan contact and they'll say, well, yeah, we talk about stuff, but we don't really document or keep any notes about those conversations. It's really important that you retain some sort of documentation, the dates, the people that were present, and who or what you spoke about in those meetings, just so you have evidence of fulfilling that fiduciary function. I will put in a plug for a resource that Moss Adams has available on the Moss Adams website, and it is a checklist of fiduciary responsibilities, and it gives you everything that you might want to consider, either if you're doing stuff from a day-to-day standpoint or monthly or quarterly, annually. So we will share the link to that at the end. Okay, everybody's favorite topic, delinquent remittances, delinquent contribution remittances. So we see continued confusion over the requirements surrounding timely remittance of participant contributions. And the question of what constitutes timely? It's a discussion we engage in frequently. And on some level, the answer is it depends. I mean, there are some general guidelines available from the Department of Labor, but essentially the requirement is that a plan sponsor should remit employee deferrals as soon as they can be segregated from company assets. And these days that tends to be pretty quick to accomplish. With many payroll platforms, the deferrals can be transferred on the same day that payroll is done, that the pay date. If you have a platform that requires a few additional days, then I usually say focus on consistency. Find a process where you can be consistent in your remittances. So if it takes you 2 days or it takes you 3 days, just being consistent in that. There is kind of an outside element in the timing element, which is it's as soon as you can segregate those assets, but no later than the 15th of the following month. And I usually tell clients that I'm working with, kind of ignore that 15th of the following month because it's not a safe harbor. It's not a bright line test. You really need to focus on when you can segregate those assets and get them remitted as soon as possible. One of the areas that we see that sometimes creates challenges is when a company has more than one payroll run in a month. So maybe they have a weekly payroll, they have a bi-weekly payroll, and they say, oh, I'm just going to hold this weekly payroll so that I only have to remit the deferrals when I do the bi-weekly payrolls. And that's not permitted. Each payroll kind of stands alone. As you retain those elective deferrals, they need to be remitted as soon as you are able to segregate them. Now, if deferrals are not remitted promptly, it creates a situation known as a prohibited transaction. And essentially what was happening is the employee deferrals are becoming a loan from the employee to the employer, which is prohibited. If you do find yourself in a situation where you have delinquent contributions, so maybe you normally remit them within 2 days of payroll, but you have a situation and it took 10 days, something happened, or you have a couple weeks where you ended up with 10 days, 8 days, something along those lines, or a longer period of time. There are several correction methods that are available. And some of those are self-correction methods. But you will be expected to make participants whole for any lost earnings that they may have earned during that period that those deferrals were held. All right. So system and organization control reporting, or SOC reporting. So most plans have at least one external provider, such as payroll provider, or maybe you have a plan custodian or a plan record keeper, and you're relying on them to perform some calculations or provide some service, right, related to the plan. Well, each of these providers will typically issue a report on their internal controls, and they'll have an external audit firm look at those controls and perform tests on them. And typically this is done annually. Full disclosure, these may not be the most exciting reports to read. They can be very lengthy. They contain a lot of information, a lot of explanatory information. But it is broken out into a generally easy to read section format. So usually about midway down, you'll find the actual controls that are being audited, or that the company, the service provider, has selected to be audited. You'll find what audit tests were performed and what the results of those were. And there's also a section that indicates what controls the plan sponsor is expected to have in place. And so you'll find that if your plan is subject to audit, that this is something your auditor is going to be asking you for. They're going to say, can you give me a copy of your SOC report for your payroll company or for your plan record keeper? And they'll likely ask you if you have read it and what responses you have to some of the sections. One thing I like to point out is the section on the complementary user entity controls, or CUECs. That is a section that is explicitly written for the reader of, or the user of, the SOC report. So that is the responsibility of the plan sponsor to read through those controls, because what the service provider is saying is, our controls, we expect our controls to operate correctly, properly, assuming you have these controls in place at your company. And so the plan sponsor should be reading through those complementary user entity controls and ensuring that you have a control in place to address each of those relevant areas. I usually ask my clients to document what those controls are, and I do find that this is an area that typically is an area for improvement in audits. I will say, with regard to companies that are public. So if you are a public company, you're subject to SOX 404 testing. Your payroll SOC report is likely covered by that testing. However, anything that's specifically related to your plan, like your record keeper, your custodian, those likely are not covered by that internal control audit. So just a word of, I guess, caution on that if you think it's being addressed. All right, and it looks like we have a polling question. Emily?
All right, our second polling question. What is SOC an acronym for? And your options are A, System and Organization Controls, B, Service Organization Controls, C, Strategy and Order Commands, or D, SOCs, OCs, and clocks. And as a reminder, if you would like to receive CPE credit for today's webcast, you will need to respond to at least 3 of the 4 polling questions. And this is our second polling question. So I'll give everyone just another moment here.
This one's interesting. I feel like we also could have put in, what does CUEC stand for? Because I feel like that's another one that we throw around as an acronym as well.
All right, let's go ahead and see what everyone had to say. Back to you.
Okay, So we've got system and organization controls with 55% and service organization controls with 41%. It is the system and organization controls, so 55.5%. We're correct. I feel like our second option there was pretty, it was so close to the wording. I think that was a tough one, but all right, good job. Okay, well, let's talk about automatic enrollment and escalation. So this is an area where we're seeing this being incorporated more into plans. And Joy will share a little bit of information later about some changes with regard to this. But we're finding that companies are electing to include automatic enrollment and automatic escalation in their plans. One of the things this helps with is just, it does increase participation in the plans. And there are some areas that I think management needs to be cognizant of. It's not a set it and forget it option. So it's not something where you flip a switch, say we have automatic enrollment, I don't need to think about eligibility or people getting enrolled. You still want to have some controls over reviewing that employees are getting the notification that they are going to be enrolled at a certain time, that employees are aware of their options of opting out. You want to make sure that employees that haven't opted out really did get put into the plan timely, that your automatic enrollment function is operating as you expect. Now, with regard to opt out, so employees can opt out of this automatic enrollment. They can do that either before deferrals are taken, or they can do it, they have a period of time after deferrals start being taken out of their check to do that. And what I think is important is that you, as a company, ensure that there is some documentation of this opt-out election that an employee makes. So if this is being done through a third-party service provider, I think that's fine. Just maybe making sure you have an understanding of how they support that opt-out occurred. But what I tend to see challenges with is when the opt-out is being communicated directly to the plan sponsor. Somebody's maybe signing something, or they're emailing maybe HR or payroll and saying, I don't want to participate, and that's being utilized as the opt-out. That can be fine as well. I just suggest that there's some retention of support for that opt-out, just to ensure you have something to back you up in the event that a participant comes back later and says, no, I did not intend to opt out. That was not my intention. And that could potentially create a liability of the plan sponsor to the plan for participant contributions that participant didn't get to make. So it's just a risk. I think it's an easy thing to kind of cover yourself in, is just retaining that support. Now, auto escalation is that option where they're saying, okay, I know I started at 3%, I'm going to have that increase maybe 1% every January 1st. And I've seen instances where a plan had both of these, auto enrollment and auto escalation, but the auto escalation doesn't trigger the way that it's expected. So if you do have auto escalation in your plan, I do encourage you to look to that date that the auto escalation is supposed to occur, and just ensure that it is operating the way that you expect, that it's being triggered on that particular date. Okay, this is just, I'm gonna say a word of caution or a word of warning for those of you that have not had the pleasure of an audit for the first time of your plan. Any audit for a first time, whether it's a plan or a corporation, there's some additional procedures that end up happening. And that is that we're going to be looking at some of the beginning balance information. Now, with a plan, this might include a look back of a few years. It might include, rolling some participant balances for a few years, just to make sure we're starting with numbers that are supported. Some of the challenges here pop up when you have maybe a change in service provider in that time period. You might have changed payroll providers, or you might have changed a record keeper or custodian in that time period. and accessing that information can be a challenge. So just a suggestion that you look ahead. If you know that you're going to be in a situation where your plan is going to require an audit, start those conversations early. It is really challenging to roll this out. You know, if your audit is due by October 15th and you start having this conversation in September, you know, it's not really enough time to ensure that that information is available. So start this conversation early. Joy is going to be talking a little bit more about this participant count. Previously, we counted the number of participants that triggered an audit based on those that were eligible to participate, whether or not they did. And that's going to be changed, or has recently changed. And so Joy will talk a little bit more about that. Okay, and then this is just a few common errors that we see that we just didn't think warranted a full slide to themselves, but just to briefly talk about these. So the first one, forfeitures not being used as defined in the plan. So your plan will define how forfeitures should be used, whether that's using them to offset your plan expenses, using them to cover part of employer contributions, but just ensuring that you know how that plan has defined that and that you're using them accordingly. Also, forfeitures shouldn't just be left to sit in the plan. They should be utilized on an annual basis. And again, your plan will define that. The next item is just making sure you're retaining support for any elective deferral changes. This is very commonly now handled at the service provider level, so you don't necessarily need to do a whole lot there. But if you do allow for changes to be made directly with payroll or with HR, just ensuring that you retain some evidence of that request for a deferral change. All plans should be maintaining fidelity bond insurance, just ensuring you have that in place and that it is renewing, that it hasn't expired. And then just when you have manual checks that are run, so if you have a manual payroll check that is run, or you have some sort of non-routine check, ensuring that you have included elective deferrals where appropriate. And just making sure that those have been considered and remitted at the time of that manual check and not held until the subsequent payroll. Okay, and with that, I am going to turn it over to Joy to talk about Secure 2.0.
Thank you, Heidi. So this next section is really the impact of the Secure 2.0 Act. And so we'll start this section off with a polling question just to see how familiar our audience is with Secure 2.0.
All right, our third polling question, how familiar are you with Secure 2.0? Your options are A, I'm an expert. B, I feel secure with 2.0. C, I've read some articles. Or D, what is the Secure Act? So we'll give everyone a moment to think about that. And as a reminder, if you would like to receive CPE credit for today's webcast, you will need to respond to at least 3 of the 4 polls. Additionally, if you would like a copy of today's slide deck, you can download them from the folder that says slide deck and handouts. We will also be sending the slides via email after the webcast. All right, just another few seconds here. All right, let's go ahead and take a look at the results, and back to you.
All right, it looks like we have some experts here on the call. Most people have read some article, and some people are, what is the Secure Act? So it looks like we have a mix of how comfortable everyone is with the Secure Act. Hopefully everyone can take at least one takeaway from this presentation today. So just as an overview for those of you that are not familiar with the Secure 2.0 Act, so the Consolidated Appropriations Act of 2023 was signed into law by the President in December of 2022, and that included the Secure 2.0. The goal was really to enhance the 2019 Secure Act with changes designed to make benefit plans look more attractive for the employers and the employees. Some of the provisions were effective as of January earlier this year. And so some of you may be familiar with those changes, not only at the employers, but maybe with your own 401k plan. And others will roll out over the next coming years. Just as a reminder, this presentation is not all inclusive of all of the changes in the Secure Act. So I just wanted to mention that we're just highlighting a few of those today. The first bullet point here on the slide in front of you is just an article from Moss Adams. The link is there on the slide, and I believe the link is in the platform, so you can go ahead and click on it. This is the Secure Act 2.0 and its effect on employee benefit plans, which was published earlier this year. And it really is an overview of some of those changes. So that's a really great starting point and great resource for those of you that are not familiar with the Act and some of those changes yet. As I mentioned, some of the changes were effective as of January this year. And so those are listed here on the slide. I'll only call out a couple since it already happened. And so most of you are probably aware of it, but the required minimum distributions, that beginning age requirement did change from 72 to 73. One thing to keep in mind is that that age will increase again in 2033, and that will become 75 instead. One of the other things that I think would be of interest as we head in, was that effective for contributions made after December 29, 22, employees may elect employer matching or non-elective contributions to be made on a Roth basis. The last one on that slide, Heidi did mention the change in participant count. So that is something that we're looking at and that you should be aware of. So only counts for eligible participants were counted previous to 1/1/23, and that now changed to participants with account balances. And so that either may delay or even eliminate the audit requirement. And really this is for defined contribution plans. And you want to keep an eye out on this just to help with costs. Sometimes there is no audit requirement. So I know that we're having a couple conversations with our clients here at Moss Adams just to make sure that that audit requirement is needed, and you only incur that cost if that's needed. So moving on to the next slide here, this is the 2024 provisions. And so we only wanted to highlight a couple, the first of which relate to distributions. So previously, the automatic distributions had a threshold of $5,000. So if any balances did not exceed that, the plan could do automatic distributions to get the funds out of the plan. Now that has increased to $7,000 beginning in 2024. So that's just also something that you want to keep an eye out and make sure that there's a plan in place to take a look at those numbers since the threshold did change. One other item is the expanded distribution categories, and there's some listed on that slide. So there's emergency, disaster relief, the domestic abuse, and terminal illness. So that's just to be aware that there are expanded distribution categories, and some of them are self-certification, similar to the hardship distributions, which were eligible for the self-certification. Ones listed on that slide would also be self-certification and allowable to do that. The other item on that slide is the self-correction of auto-enrollment and auto-escalation errors. So plans now have 9.5 months after the plan year end to self-correct. So that is a change that may help with the self-correction. And so just keeping an eye out for that. And Heidi mentions the auto-escalation and auto-enrollment earlier in the slide and where the pitfalls may happen. So that 9.5 months could be used to get everything in order and make sure you have processes in place to make sure that auto-enrollment and auto-escalations are done properly within the plan provisions. So this last slide is the 2025 provisions, and I know it's a little bit of ways out, so we'll just touch on these briefly. Heidi did mention the automatic enrollment and the auto escalate. So newly established plans. So these are for newly established plans. They must have that automatic enrollment feature of 3%, and you auto escalate that to 1% each year up to 10%. And in certain instances, that may go as high as 15%. So keeping an eye out for that. because that'll also probably increase your participant count with that automatic enrollment feature for newly established plans. The other item listed is the catch-up contributions. So this has increased from individuals from age 60 and it went up to age 63, and they may contribute the greater of 10,000 or 150,000 of the regular catch-up amount. So keeping an eye out for that as you think about setting up your plans and the processes for 2025. The other item is the long-term part-time worker. So this is defined as an employee completing 2 consecutive years of service with at least those 500 worked hours. So this is different from it being the 3 consecutive years as previously mentioned, or as previously known as. And so keeping an eye out because it did decrease to the 2 consecutive years. And the requirement also extended to the 403B plans. The last item on the slide is the plan amendments. So with all of these changes, the plan amendments are required to be completed by the end of the first plan year beginning on or after January 1st, 2025. So I know that was a lot of information here, and I hope you're able to have some takeaways for the Secure 2.0. We'll be moving on to key recommendations. And so with today's world and the fast-paced technology, it would just be amiss if we didn't have a slide on cybersecurity. Just as an overall reminder, really assessing and monitoring cybersecurity risk should be an ongoing process. It shouldn't be something that you take a look at once and then you shelve it. It should be something that you look at as you go through the year, as things pop up, as risk change, just based on things that are outside of your control. So really, it should be an ongoing process and part of your fiduciary duties. And that could include developing the cybersecurity policies and procedures, recognizing policy procedures, and really addressing anything that comes up. And why is this so important? Well, that operational implementation is so important because those fraudulent distributions are actually on the rise. And so the cases of bad actors impersonating participants to take withdrawals, that really has increased over the years. Other ways cybersecurity can pose a risk is that cyber criminals, exploit security weaknesses to steal account assets. And family members sometimes also exploit participants, and that all really presents a risk. For your fiduciary duty, you want to make sure that you're protecting the plan assets and protecting all of the PII even. The PII being the personal identifiable information. So just as a reminder, that's just any representation of information that really permits the identity of the individual to whom it applies. So that could be date of birth, it could be your social security number. And so really protecting all of that information is key as you operate the plan. The third bullet point there is the DOL cybersecurity resource, and there's a link on the platform as well. So that link will take you to an article, and this article is from the Department of Labor, and it is their guidance on cybersecurity plans. And this is really addressed to plan sponsors, plan fiduciaries, record keepers, and plan participants. And it's best practices for maintaining cybersecurity. And you want to keep an eye out on that. And the guidance comes in the form of 3 documents. So there's tips for hiring a service provider, cybersecurity program best practices, and just some online security tips. So for the tips for hiring a service provider, you just want to make sure, similar to how you don't just have something on paper and shelve it, when you hire a service provider, you want to make sure that you're asking the right questions on their cybersecurity practice and how they're keeping the plan assets safe, how they're keeping the confidential information safe, the personal identifiable information. And that's really just to address any risks and respond to those risks. So as you're making any type of changes, I know that Heidi said earlier in the presentation, there could be changes in service provider. When you do that, have those hard conversations, ask those questions of how do you protect those assets? How do you identify risk to assets and protect the necessary data and the systems to make sure that those bad actors don't have access? So the flip side of it is that it's really expensive to communicate and pay for monitoring should you have a breach. And so really making sure that you have those processes and policies in place and that you're revisiting it at least annually, I would say, would be a great practice to put in place and implement. So maybe the fiduciary tip here is that you look at that cybersecurity program best practices, and that really lists 12 action items that should be in place by the company, by the plan sponsor. And this could be a formal, well-documented cybersecurity program or prudent annual risk assessment, but reviewing all of those and saying, this is what we're doing to address all of those cybersecurity risks. I think having that documented in one of the minutes is a great way to show that you are performing your fiduciary duty and that it is something that is taken seriously, and in the event that there is a cybersecurity breach from the plan, and really addressing and monitoring that and shifting if needed. So hand in hand with the cybersecurity risk, I did mention the change in service provider. So planning for a change in service provider, whether that's your payroll or your record keeper, one thing that's important is that change management piece, and that's really to help protect the data, the integrity of that data, the completeness and accuracy of that data, and how that's transferred over to the new service provider. So taking a look at that and just making sure that all of the information that's transferred over reflects the information that was in the previous service provider, and that all the data that was transferred over is complete, and documenting those processes and policies. And that's really for when we come in for the audit, we can just get that documentation and say, yep, management did, the plan sponsor did what they were supposed to for checking to see that the data was complete and accurate. One tip, if you haven't gone through a change in service provider, is really downloading those key reports from the previous service provider. A lot of the times your access is then limited once you terminate. And so getting those key reports year to date, quarterly, and what we normally ask for in a plan audit, and just getting it from that service provider before the contract is actually terminated. So that it'll help with the audit and make it go more smoothly, really. So those are some tidbits on planning for the change in service provider, and really that data governance and making sure that everything is your ducks are all in a row. I think it'll just help going forward and making sure that nothing bigger happens, because then it becomes something that you have to address more fully, and nobody really wants that. All right, so moving into internal controls.
Okay. Well, we talked a little bit about internal controls already. I talked about the SOC report, I talked about plan oversight and the controls there. But there's a few other places that I think we can touch on. And just to kind of recap, so it's not just that you want to have a process in place. Obviously, process is important, but you want a process as a control in place to ensure that that process is actually occurring. So whether that be some sort of review or monitoring, some oversight to ensure that the process is working the way you expected. So payroll controls are an area that tend to have a significant impact on the plan overall. It impacts your eligibility determinations. It could impact distributions and vesting determinations. And so ensuring that you have established a process to make sure that data that is going into your payroll or HRIS that the data is accurate is critical. So making sure the hire date is accurate so that that eligibility can be correctly calculated. Potentially making the date of birth also impacts the eligibility. It will also potentially impact when you make required minimum distributions. So those are pieces of data that we do some audit procedures on when we're doing a plan audit. And you just want to make sure you have good controls over that. You also would like, when you do have somebody that has enrolled in the plan, you do want to make sure that when that enrollment starts, that their deferrals are coming out as expected from payroll. So having a process, a control in place to validate that those elective deferrals are coming out as they have been elected. And this doesn't mean that you need to do 100% test, but that you have something in place where you're checking periodically to make sure that that is occurring the way that you anticipate it should. The other thing that I would recommend is having a control in place over reviewing record keeper information, just to ensure that the information that you believe to be accurate is also reflected accurately by that record keeper. So this might be the payroll remittances that we discussed, making sure those have made it into the plan. I've had a lot of clients that have had a situation where it's because of this control that they were able to identify that for some reason there was a glitch in the upload and the deferral information did not get sent to their service provider. And having that in place really did help catch that quickly and prevent any potential liabilities there. Reviewing the distributions that are coming out of the plan and ensuring that it appears that your vesting is being calculated correctly. There are situations where you maybe change a vesting schedule, or you have maybe you've merged in a company and the vesting schedule for that group of employees for a portion of their account might be a little different, and you've got a couple different vesting schedules you're working from. So a periodic review of some of those distributions, I think, is in order. Again, not 100% test, but just making sure that that's operating the way you anticipate. And then periodically checking employee deferral changes, just to make sure that those are being correctly captured, particularly if you are allowing those to be done directly within the payroll or HR function at the company versus having it done exclusively by the service provider. And then periodically verifying that eligibility is being correctly handled by a service provider, or that your internal process is working the way you anticipate, and that individuals are getting that opportunity to enroll timely. Okay, and my favorite topic, financial reporting. So this area can be a little bit of a challenge. Oftentimes there are people involved in the plan who are experts at the operations of the plan provisions, know all the ins and outs of the plan, but don't really have a lot of experience with financial statements and financial reporting. And so the end result of our audit is obviously an audit opinion, but typically also includes us assisting with the drafting of the financial statements and the footnote disclosures. And it's important that somebody at the company has an understanding of what types of things should be disclosed in financial statements and how they should read. So I typically would recommend to my clients that they incorporate, if the HR or payroll person, whoever the administrator of the plan is, if they don't have a comfort level with the financial reporting process, I recommend that they incorporate somebody from the finance or accounting side that does have that background, just to help balance that review of information. Some of the areas that can be kind of tricky, investments can be a little bit tricky. There are funds that sometimes might appear as one type of thing. You might see a fund and think, oh, well, that's a money market account, when really it's a money market fund and needs to be reported in with the mutual funds. Or you might have something that may look like a mutual fund, but it really needs to be reported from a financial reporting standpoint as a pooled separate account. And just having that awareness that sometimes things are not what they might seem on the surface, and having those discussions with either your finance team or your auditor, just to make sure that you're capturing things correctly in the financials and the footnote disclosures. And then discussing accrual and cash basis. So oftentimes the service providers will provide you statements that are on what we call the cash basis. So meaning they receive funds on January 1st of 2023, they count those funds as being part of 2023 revenues or incomes to the fund. Whereas the accrual basis might say, yes, you received money on January 1st of 2023, but it was really a December 28th, 2022 payroll, and it really pertains to 2022. And so on the accrual basis, we would put that in 2022 versus the cash basis would drop that into 2023. So often we have these adjustments of these dollar amounts kind of back and forth in the plan for financial reporting to ensure that we are capturing information in the financial statements in the correct period on the accrual basis. Just having that awareness, including, again, finance often is very experienced in this because accruals are fairly common in corporate financial statements, and just ensuring that the information is landing in the right period. Rarely do I see this be a material item in your financial statements, but it can be, and so it's important to give consideration to that. The other thing is the Form 5500, oftentimes first pass, it's done on a cash basis, and it won't include maybe receivables that the plan has, whereas we will include those on the financial statements. And so having that awareness, and typically what we see is a modification of the Form 5500 prior to it being filed to include those accrual items, those receivables, etc., in the 5500. Alternatively, you end up with a footnote disclosure that says, here's what the financial statements say, and these are the different things that aren't reflected in our 5500, and that comes down to this number of what's in the 5500. It's like a reconciliation between the two, but it's just a little cleaner to make the 5500 agree to your financial statements. And so I think with that, we come to another polling question. So Emily.
All right. Our final polling question for today: how prepared do you feel about your upcoming plan audit? And your options are A, very, I've got this. B, somewhat, a few questions, but ready otherwise. C, not really, I've got some homework to do. Or D, not applicable, no audits for me. So once you have completed all CPE requirements, you'll be able to download a PDF of your CPE certificate from the CPE progress window. Give everyone a few more seconds on this final poll. All right, let's go ahead and take a look at the results. Back to you.
All right, well, looking at the spread and also in monitoring all of the great questions that have been coming through, I think we have a group of very talented individuals who want healthy employee benefit plans and really want to do their best when it comes to your participants and your fiduciary responsibility. So it looks like we have 32% that are very confident and 33% that are somewhat. So that's great, more than half. Happy to hear it. And we had quite a few questions come through. I've been answering them as they've come along, but if we don't happen to answer your question, we will follow up with you after this webinar. One of the recurring questions, though, that's been coming through is, what is the most common issue or finding that you see during your audits?
Well,
Heidi or
I will
Joy?
start.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll start there. So I think one of the things that I most commonly see is one of the things that I spoke about, which is a lack of evaluation of the SOC reports, not giving consideration to those outside entities that are really playing a key role in your plan operations and kind of doing the set it and forget it. I know that so-and-so company XYZ record keeper is handling this. I don't have to think about it. And really, you still do need to think about it. So I think that's one of the common findings that I have in the audits that I perform.
Great. Joy, do you have anything that
Yeah,
comes to mind?
yeah, I think the most common finding from the audits that I work on is really that delinquent contributions and the timely remittance of those contributions. Oftentimes you see, hey, there was just something that popped up that week or somebody was out on vacation. And really, I think there is some level of expectation that there is some cross training and making sure that the contributions and the funds are truly transferred to the plan as soon as administratively possible, and not relying on that 15th day. I think a lot of plans out there, they do tend to look to that rule. So Heidi mentioned that during the presentation, but it definitely is that delinquent contributions and just making sure there is a systematic um, process in place and that the plan is following the policy that management put in place. I think that's really important to just take a look at. And if there is something that happened during the year, really document that and say how it was addressed and assess if you do think that it wasn't remitted timely.
Absolutely. And a good reminder that now that we're coming to the end of 2023, if everyone has a little bit of a takeaway from this, is if you go back and look at your Form 5500, Schedule H, line 4A, if that has been checked yes, and you have identified delinquent contributions, make sure that you are correcting them so that you have the opportunity to take that off the year after it's corrected, basically. So, if you haven't corrected those contributions, get in touch with your TPA, get those contributions corrected so that you can subsequently, the year after it's corrected, check no on that line 4A. So the other question that has come up is, what is your single best takeaway or tip for the audience?
I think mine is going back to the cybersecurity section of the presentation and really looking at those best practices. Just there's been so much focus on cybersecurity and technology and everything that's changing. Just cybersecurity breaches definitely are on the rise, and just taking a look to see if your service provider has best practices in place, to see if the company has best practices in place, to make sure that, hey, this is an ongoing monitoring cycle area that the company is focused on, because protecting those plan assets and that information, that data is really important. And it's really unfortunate when a breach does happen. And so just making sure there are safeguards that the plan has implemented, I think, is really important and probably something that you want to focus on, especially as we head into next year.
Absolutely. Heidi, do you have any takeaways that you want to share?
Yeah, I would just say, a lot of this, it's just making sure you're communicating with your service providers, whether that be your CPA firm or your record keeper, whoever, just to get insight onto what things you need to be considering, because they have a ton of information for you that everybody's happy to share. And so just really kind of developing those relationships so that you can be better prepared for what could happen. So.
Yep, absolutely. Well, it looks like we are almost to the top of the hour, so I'd like to express a sincere thank you to both of our speakers, Heidi and Joy, for sharing their expertise with us today. And on behalf of Heidi, Joy, and Moss Adams, I'd like to thank everyone for their participation today. Have a great day.
All right, thank you, Heidi, Joy, and Erin again for a great presentation. If you had questions for our presenters that we did not get to, we'll be doing our best to follow up with you after the webcast. As a reminder, if you attended today's presentation in a group and would like to receive CPE credit, you must complete the group attendance sheet found in the slide deck and handouts window. If you participated as an individual and met all certification requirements, your certificate is available to download now in the CPE progress window. I'll keep the webcast console open for a few minutes to give you time to download your CPE certificate. A copy will be emailed within 3 weeks should you have any difficulty downloading it now. And here's a link to an online survey where you can provide feedback for today's presentation. Please take a moment to complete this survey as your feedback is very important to us. Thank you again for joining us, and we hope you'll join us again next time.